that the model is perfect. There are no lumps or bumps on it. You need to find the Fovea palatinae, which on this model is quite difficult, but you don't want it going too far into the soft palate area. You want it to sit over the hammer notch, and it needs to go right down into the sulcus. And so with this model, it's really quite an easy thing to just take the pencil line right down into the sulcus, up over the, I missed that one, over the labial frenum, over the buccal frenum, and back. Then the next thing to do is make sure you have a wire strengthener. And I've pre-cut some pieces of wire just to show you what that is, okay? This wire is not, as I said before, it's not super duper wire, it's just wire from Bunnings, and it's easily bent with your fingers and thumbs. You need to sit the wire in the palette. If it's be further than your pencil line, it's not going to work, okay? Because it's going to stick out of the rim. It can't sit on the ridge, but it just sits in behind the ridge like that. Very, very simple. I also need my tweezers. Yeah, you can before you put it in the wax. Yes, absolutely. Not after. Okay. So that's ready. So I'm going to take a piece of wax and I'm going to heat it up. My bits of scrap here. These, by the way, are pieces of scrap that I got out of the box there that had been discarded. Okay, that's going to sit really happily there. It's not too big, not too small. You have your pencil line as your posterior border, so use that pencil line as the posterior border of your registration rim instead of having to trim that back as well. Somebody loves tea, or tea loves somebody. Not quite sure who or what, but that's okay. Make it nice and soft without melting it. Sorry? Is that what it says on it? Tea? Something. Yeah. Won't be for long. Sit it down into the palette, pick up the wax, pick up the model, and with your other hand, and I'm just stabilising that with my nice big thick thumb. I'm pushing down as far as I can into that sulcus. Over the ridges. And nice and clean into that palette, okay? Because of the shape of this sulcus, it's not going to go right down into the sulcus, but I'll show you how to fix that in just a moment. Tweezers, ladies and gentlemen, I think you all have those in your toolkit. Heat up the wax, heat up the wire. It doesn't have to be red hot, just warmed, and place it exactly where you want it to go. Okay? Let's push it a little bit into the wax. Then warm up the wax on one side. Fold it over and push down into, you see where my thumb is? I'm stabilising that as I go, moving that as I go, covering over that wire. It wasn't so hot that it went right, the wire wasn't so hot that it went right through the wax onto the surface. And it wasn't so cold that it's just sitting on top. So just embed it a little bit. And again, pushing right down as far as you can into that sulcus. Probably a little bit too much. Now, none of that wax was so hot that it burnt me. And there you have a base, okay? It's sitting out over the land a little bit, but at this stage that does not matter because you're going to trim it back later, okay? If you took this off now to trim it, it would distort, even though it has the wire on it, because the wax is still warm. So you're not going to remove it at all until much later. If this were the acrylic base, you wouldn't have the wire obviously, but at this stage you'd take it off and you'd trim it, okay? So the next step is to make the rim. What you're going to do is you're going to use the shape of the land of the model to shape your rim, okay? You can see that the incisive papilla is right there. So you're going to place the rim anterior to the incisive papilla so that it has that good placement for to hold out the lips and good placement for the teeth when we do the trying. So this is a really good way of making a rim. There are several ways to do it, again, as usual. I only want you to use this width of wax. I don't want to see you using the long side of the wax sheet. Just the width, please. Make it nice and warm. And just fold it over and very gently fold it onto itself. Try to remove as much air from the fold as you can. Make it nice and neat. You can roll it, but I prefer to fold it. Don't ask me why. It's very, very soft in there, and it needs to be.
How many times do you just do the whole thing?
I don't know.
But you just do it until the whole
1,
thing.
2, 3, 4. No, that should be about enough. You can get, from our regular sheets of wax, from that sheet of wax, you can get a good full upper registration room with some left over. However, some people do like to use a sheet and a half, which drives me crazy. Now, tricky bit. This length is not quite enough to go from this tuberosity to this tuberosity and forward of the incisor papilla. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it. You also remember that at the posterior parts you'll want this to be 8 to 10 millimetres. At the anterior section you want it to be 5 millimetres wide, yes? So you're just going to stretch it. I'm not touching the posterior parts, I'm just stretching the anterior. So now you can see that it's narrower at the anterior and wider at the posterior. So to attach it, you can start at the tuberosity area. Take it as far back as you possibly can Don't worry about placement just at this stage, but do make sure that it's well to the anterior of the ridge.
Chrissy, so if you've got a stretcher, why wouldn't you just use the longer side?
Because it's wasteful. Because you want it narrower at the anterior, you don't want all that bulk there when you've put the rim on. Okay? So you're going to use the shape of the model to determine the shape of the land of the model to determine the shape of the rim. Okay? So I'm just checking here, and I'm sorry I can't do this backwards. Can you see that's a good shape?
Yes.
See the shape of the land of the model? You can see the shape of the land of the model. Don't know how many cameras I need to talk to. Don't worry about the height at this stage. We're just talking about the shape of the rim and the placement of the rim. So what I'm doing is I'm using my thumb to just push it a little bit further forward, widen it at the canine area, so it's a nice shape. Now, I need to fill in this space here, oops, and this space here, because we want it a nice block. So, this small piece of wax that I have left over is just perfect. I know I talked about being mean and not using very much wax, but the other side of that is if you have too much wax, if you've got wax all over the place, it's much more difficult to control. So if you just have small pieces of wax, you have more control over them. So nice and soft. Again, if you have a nice soft rim, you can spend a few minutes manipulating it. Please don't fold the rim and then leave it aside, because you won't be able to manipulate it properly. So just a small amount of wax, and hold it in and push it into that void. All the way around, and I'm stretching and I'm pulling at the same time because I don't want an excess of wax in there. And I'm just pushing it into that space between the rim and the base. On the palatal side, again, warming it up, it's really hot, and push it into that void and push that piece into that side. Okay, now it's time to put it all together. You want your wax knife really, really hot for this. The downside of making these is, especially on a day like today where it's going to be very, very warm and very, very humid, with several people having a Bunsen burner on, we're going to be quite warm in here today. You can see I'm perspiring now. Okay. It's very hot. So you're smoothing and melting those components together. The base, the rim, and the little band that you put in there. And you're making it into one piece of wax. If you do this and your wax knife is not hot enough, what's going to happen is you're going to flake the wax, and you're going to have little air pockets in between the wax and the pieces of wax, and it's very difficult to come back from that. So it must all be melted really well together. So keep heating your wax knife. making sure it's completely hot. If you think you might have a bubble in there, just get in there and remove it. And this is another good reason why everything must be disinfected before it goes back to the clinic, because I tend to cool down the wax. There's still a little bit of movement in that wax because it was nice and soft at the beginning. We'll go around to the palatal side. And I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to be using that wax to fill in the voids, to ensure that the wire is really well covered and there's not a lump there. Just want to add a little bit more into there. For some reason there's these little bits of like brush. On the other side the same. Just melting it all together. Making it one mass. So that's the basic shape. You can see that the rim is wavy, but we're going to fix that up later. I can't take it off at the moment because the wax is still very soft, and so if I take it off it's going to distort. Okay? I'll show you how to do the base on the partial upper